Welcome back to the Art Coaching Club podcast, and today we are finishing out this 3-day series as we welcome back season 2 of the podcast, and we are talking about everybody's favorite topic, how to price your artwork. This is probably one of the main questions I get asked, that and like shipping tips, but a huge question I get asked is, how do I price my artwork? Right now I'm selling to friends and family. I don't want to outprice them, or my audience isn't going to pay that, or where I live isn't going to pay that, or I want to get into galleries, but I'm not priced high enough. So today I'm going to break down, I guess, the beginning, I will say, because I have endless thoughts on this, but the beginning of my thoughts on pricing your artwork, how to price your artwork, and just how to think about that, and how to land on a number. We will also get into some of the pricing mistakes I see quite frequently and what those can really do to your business, what I think is really happening there, and then the different techniques and some things you can walk away with to start pricing more appropriately today. So I want to start off with a couple of pricing mistakes that I see pretty frequently. So the first and worst offender is giving away work for free. And I would also put just like giving away work for essentially free in that bucket. I think a lot of artists think exposure is going to get them to that next level, and really rarely does it do that. I think you really need to evaluate, is this me giving you free art for exposure actually giving me exposure, or is this something that I'm just kind of hoping and wishing because I'm maybe a newer artist? So examples I would give include, giving away art for free in hopes of it being, them talking about it on social media or them posting about it. Or, I would say if it's an influencer and you have something written out, totally could be worth it. If it's going in a designer show house and it's going to get exposure, it's going to get photographed, worth talking about. If it is going to just be like staged in a home for sale, that's not always worth it unless you're going to get some photos or something out of it. And the reason I say that is because oftentimes when it comes to staging, if it's for free and you're not getting anything out of it, one, you run the risk of that artwork getting damaged. Two, a lot of times, and I will say this as a recent home purchaser, when I was touring homes, the last thing I was thinking about was buying art off the walls. I was like, I'm focusing on my down payment and I'm looking at the house. I really wasn't thinking about what was in the house at all. I mean, obviously there was furniture in the homes because that gives the idea of what the home would feel like. But frankly, I didn't even like the furniture always that was in the homes. I definitely wasn't looking at the artwork. So again, just some examples, but I would say also if you are donating pieces, if it's a cause you believe in, like, yes, absolutely, donate all day long, but don't feel like you have to, because rarely does that equate to like great exposure, which is I think what we are sold quite often as artists. I also think many of you start as hobbyists, or it's something you really love, and then you actually decide to turn it into a business. And so I think sometimes people take advantage of that. Sometimes unintentionally. I think a lot of times like our friends and family think this is something that's just fun for you, and therefore why wouldn't you want to paint the banner for the baby shower, or paint the champagne bottle that's a gift, or donate like the stationery for their wedding for free because you love this stuff. I think it's really important to set up boundaries into, what you're willing to do for your friends and family that you love, what that rate looks like, and then what you are willing to pay for. So set that up early and quickly, I guess. Set it up early, but also you can always do a friends and family rate. So if you're somebody who regularly does, we'll use the wedding stationery example, just say like, I do a 20% off friends and family rate. They feel good, they're getting a discount, but you're not giving it away for free, because I know what that leads to. Second mistake I see is artists undercutting their own prices in a panic. So slow months happen. That's very normal. Slow shows happen. Also very normal. And I see a lot of times people freak out, which, a little bit reasonably, and they drop below, last year's prices or the prices before, or they're like negotiating lower when Many times your prices, I would say probably like 80% of the time, your prices aren't the problem. Usually it's you're not in front of the right people. It's not a good show. It's naturally a slow season. And your pricing isn't going to be the thing that's going to make people change their minds. I mean, it's really important to understand pricing psychology and why people buy artwork. And some people buy artwork and they love the piece so much. If it's $1,200 or it's $1,500, it doesn't matter to them. And I think that's important to understand. But then the other side of it is if people aren't buying artwork because let's say, it's summer and they just spent a lot on their family vacation, you lowering the price from $500 to $350 isn't going to change their mind because they're just not thinking about it. So it's okay. That will be a podcast for another day, but we will talk about what to do during slow seasons. But slow seasons aren't always a reason to just slash your prices. If anything, it can really undermine your business as a whole. I would say another thing I see people do, not as frequently, but I do see some people kind of pricing just off materials and not really factoring in time. I also would expand on that. I see people who factor in time and materials, but they don't think about all the time it took them to get there. And so what I mean by that is you reach a point in your business as an artist where you are the expert. You are the expert in the thing you're doing. If you think about it, in any other job, you get rewarded as you get better at said task. So as an artist, the more I paint something, likely, hopefully, the better and more efficient I am at painting it. Often. Am I lowering my price because I paint faster now? Absolutely not. If anything, I'm raising my price because I am now better at said skill. And so I think that's something I see sometimes, and it's just definitely something to avoid. Another thing I see is artists just kind of blankly copying someone else's prices, or potentially worse, looking to other artists and just being like, I'll just be like the cheaper version. You don't want to be the cheaper version. I don't think we ever think of it that way, but I see so many artists doing this. They're like, oh, well, these artists are all charging this. I'll just be cheaper. And it's like, okay, do you want to be the Walmart of artists? No. Those of you listening to this, you do not want to be the Walmart of artists. Walmart has its purpose, but you don't want to be the Walmart of artists. So definitely, it's important to know the market. So definitely research what other artists are charging, but it's also very important to understand all the factors at play. So your own input costs, your own representation, your own time that goes into it, all of this comes into play. So you want to research the market, know where ballpark you need to be, but then make sure you're basing this off your actual numbers. And then the last thing, or the last mistake I can think of today, is people underpricing commissions to land the client. So I am definitely guilty of this. I'm like, oh, well, I don't think this client will pay this, so I'm just going to give her a lower price. Then all of a sudden, you resent the project. Or you just underprice commissions in general. It's like, oh, again, maybe I've had a slow month and I just really want to close this deal, so I price it low to get it in the door. And then you're like, why am I charging so little? And then worst case, that client comes back a year later, they want something else from you, and you've kind of like sold them this incorrect pricing model. And so they're probably going to expect something lower than what you actually should be charging. So these are all mistakes I see. Let's talk about what they actually cost you. So one, if you start low, I think what a lot of artists do is they're like, well, I'll start really, really low. And a lot of times this is because it's starting off as a hobby or a side business or however you want to think about it. So I understand where this is, like, I was there too. I understand where it's coming from. But it is very hard to build a brand where you're starting at, let's say, an art piece for $50 to try to get that same piece up to, let's say, $500. Like, that is a hard mountain to climb. You're kind of anchoring yourself to that first number, because think about it. Every person that follows you, they're clocking, oh, okay, well, she sells 8x10s for $50. Okay, like all of a sudden you're having to like take these people along this journey of this like, treacherous hike up Mount Everest to get your prices to where they need to be to maybe reach those goals of, let's say, working with a gallery or being full-time. It is really hard to be full-time if you're charging, what did I just say, $50 for an 8x10. So one, it's a really hard hole to climb out of. That does not mean you need to start at the top of the mountain. I would say think about your brand and the ideal customer you want to have, and what would that ideal customer pay for a newer artist. So you don't need to think about what would I pay for my artwork because that can be distorted. You need to think about who is my ideal customer, what is their age, what is their demographic, what are they paying for artwork? And then I'm a little newer on the scene, let's say, or maybe I don't have quite as much representation as some of the artists they're collecting, so I'll be a little bit lower than that. But that does not mean you need to be at the bottom. So I think that's important to think about. Again, we'll talk about ideal customer more too, probably in a later episode. Another mistake, or I guess another consequence of these mistakes, would be that galleries, shows, interior designers, representation, they notice when your pricing is too low. So let's start with galleries. Galleries take a percentage. I run a gallery. I know this. If your pricing is really low, it is hard for me to make it work to work with you. So it is costly to run a gallery, even an online gallery like what I have. And luckily mine is online. I work with more emerging artists for that reason because I have a little bit less overhead, but it is still expensive to run a gallery. Second, there's a lot of time, and there is a time cost for me to go in and market your new work and market your collection. And at the end of the day, if I'm getting 40% or some galleries charge 50% on a $50 piece, and I'm like, wow, I just spent all these weeks marketing this and I made $25, it's not worth it to the gallery. So I think there's that thing to think about. Shows, they're going to want you to be comparable with other artists. So if you're much lower than the other artists, you're probably not going to get in, or you're just going to not stand out in the right way. You want to be able to look left and right and feel like you are somewhat in the same ballpark. Interior designers, as an example, they are selling a certain type of home to their clients. And yes, there are some like bargain hunter, art hunter, interior designers, but I would say a lot of designers I work with want the art to match the price point psychology of the other things they're placing in that home. So there are some designers who unfortunately like style with home goods art and things like that, but I would say the ideal customers of interior designers that a lot of you want to work with, are going to want your pricing to be appropriate. Again, there's, outliers to every rule, but I think that's important to understand. So those are all things to think about. And then the biggest one I want to get to that underpricing causes is burnout. The amount of artists I see quit, go back to another job, be uninspired, not feel creative, not do the things they need to do on the business side, the marketing side, painting side, are artists that don't charge enough. Because if you think about it, let's say I want to make $1,000 a month and I'm charging $100 per painting. I'm going to have to charge, I'm doing easy math here, obviously. I'm going to have to sell 10 paintings, which means, let's say, if I don't have a 100% sellout rate, let's say I have to make 20 paintings to have 10 sell. That's a lot of work. Now, let's say I want to make it that same $1,000 a month, but my average piece is $500. Okay, I could paint, I only need to sell 2. So I could paint, let's call it 5 paintings and just really dive into those. And, one, I could spend a little more time creating. I could have more downtime. I could spend more time on the marketing. I could spend more time on the business stuff. I mean, obviously these things make sense, but I think we think, oh my gosh, but if I charge $500, they're less likely to sell. And truly, that is rarely the case if you build your business the right way, if your marketing is strong, if your artwork is strong. And I will say most artists I have worked with who have finally bit the bullet and priced appropriately. Notice I'm not saying just priced high, because there is still an art to this, which we'll get into. When artists priced appropriately for their level, skill set, credibility, all of these different factors, they sell so much more. And I will say, myself included, I've slowly raised my prices over time, and I would really mark 2025 as the year I started selling a lot of my own artwork at a higher price point, and I sold so much more artwork. And obviously there's so many factors to all of this, but I would say last year and this year, my personal art sales have skyrocketed compared to where they were before. And that is truly because I finally was like, I'm going to raise my prices, and people see more value in the work. I always think about when you're buying something, if it's priced higher, it's also an indication of quality. And people do question oh, why is this only $25? It must be a print, or it must be, and it's important to understand your work has value. So if you leave with nothing else, know that your work has value, you have value, and you should be pricing appropriately because I want you all to succeed. I also think, and this kind of led me down a side thought just now that I will quickly share. I also think a lot of women, and I would say a lot of my listeners are Southern women, they do feel this need or this, they don't want to be greedy. So they're like, I don't want to charge too much because like, who am I to be charging this? I don't want to be greedy. And whether this is spoken out loud or not, it's something I do sense with certain groups of people I talk to. And I think it's really important to understand that it is not greedy to want your business to be successful. And I know there's a few men that listen to this and y'all are great too, but there are so many studies proven that when women make more money, they do such good stuff with it. Like I know if I sell out a collection of artwork, you know what I'm doing? I'm going supporting other artists. I'm going and supporting female-owned brands. I'm going and supporting like local small businesses. Like I'm not just going and like splurging and wasting my money or however we think the negative would be, being greedy with it. It's like I'm like putting it back in other people's pockets, I guess, if that makes sense. So I think that's just a really important side tangent that if any of you need to hear that, hopefully that 1 little minute rant I just gave stands out to you. If you don't need to hear it, you could have just scrolled past or whatever, fast forward past that. So wanted to include that. So those are all just things that can be kind of issues if you don't price appropriately. So now I want to talk about how to actually fix your pricing. So one, I want you to understand the foundations of pricing your artwork. So before I get into the strategies, ways to think about pricing, I want you to understand that your prices don't need to be based off self-doubt or fear of selling or, you know, where you live. They need to be based off of these things. One, and probably one of the most important, is your experience and your skill level. So, you know, how long have you been doing this? Do you already have a little bit of an audience? What is, you know, your skill level? Are you still figuring it out? Like I definitely know I have certain collections of artwork that I'm like, I am so strong. Like this is so strong. I like feel really like I feel really good about this. I have other collections of artwork where I'm like, we're still like figuring out this idea. And maybe this is like my tester. Like you kind of got to figure it out. And based on that, you can determine kind of the range of your pricing. You also want to think about the time and effort you put into each piece and not just the physical time of that piece, but like all the effort it takes to get there, because we like somehow forget that the years it took for us to come up with this subject matter or this style. You definitely want to think about the cost of materials, overhead, business expenses, etc. So what I recommend for this is I have a spreadsheet. You can do this however makes sense for you, but I have a spreadsheet that lists the title of all of my pieces and then description, details, all of that relevant stuff, and then the input cost. So the minute I buy a canvas, I kind of estimate paint cost. You only use like a portion of the tube. The framing cost, if I get it framed, because a lot of my work is framed, and I just have that number. And if that number is $100 staring at me, if that number is $50, if that number is $300 staring at me, I'm like, I have my input cost. I have to charge more than that or I'm losing money, obviously. So I do that. Then I have a line that is the price. And so what I do in that column is probably the price I think would be appropriate. The price maybe from a square inch method I think would be appropriate, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I compare it to what my input costs are. And sometimes the square inch method, for example, when you're framing artwork doesn't work because you're like, okay, but this frame was $100 and this frame was $300. You cannot price those the same. So that's where just having a spreadsheet where you truly just write out, here are the input costs for each piece can be really helpful because it can give you an idea of like, oh, I need to charge at least this. So I have that column. And then my final column is what it would be if I sold it at a gallery. And I just do if a gallery took 50%, because I think that's a pretty standard number to think about. And that's also really helpful because what I do is I will take the selling price, because they need to match. Your prices need to be the same across the board, whether you're selling it yourself or with a gallery. That is very important to your credibility. So I take that same number, I divide it in half, because let's say the gallery takes 50%, and then I subtract my input costs. And that's the money I'm actually profiting. And yes, I think we all understand that intuitively, But I don't think we do that math enough to realize like, oh, my input costs were $300, but I only charged $400, but then the gallery took half. All of a sudden you're losing money. We are not doing work to lose money. We're not doing work to break even. We are doing work to make money. So it's really important to understand that. And then finally, you do want to take into account industry standards, market demand. Where are you trying to be? So if you're trying to be in a certain gallery, look at the other art in that gallery. Are you in the same ballpark? If you are so much cheaper, you're probably not going to get into that gallery. So it's important to understand, just kind of look to your left and right, and who are your peers? Who do you want to be surrounded by? And are you approaching where they are? And if you don't factor these things in, you are selling yourself short. I can pretty much almost probably guarantee it. So that's the starting point. After that, I want you to think about, there are 3 main models that get talked about, or that I think about when it comes to pricing your artwork. And I sort of do like a mix of all of these. So the most common is the square inch method, which is just the length times the width times some multiplier. So let's say we had a 10 by 10 piece and my multiplier was 2, I would do 10 times 10, 100 times 2, 200. So that 10 by 10 piece would be $200. The square inch method is great. It doesn't work super well for really small pieces, and like you kind of have to scale it if you have like wide range from, let's say, 10 by 10 to like 40 by 40. You might need kind of multipliers that change throughout there. But it's good in giving you that starting point of, okay, these are like ticking up at an appropriate rate as I scale in size. So that's one thing to think about. A tip, and something that comes up as a question a lot, is, well, how do I do the square inch method if I'm framing, or if it's paper versus canvas versus wood panel? I would suggest, and this is what I do, I have a different square inch method and multiplier for each medium. So my canvases, as an example, might be my starting point. So I might say those have a multiplier of 2. Work on paper unframed might have a multiplier of 1, and then work on wood panel might be 2.2 because it's a little bit more expensive. Do not stick with these, like please run your own numbers, but just as an example. And then with framing, what I typically do is I figure out what the price would be unframed, and then I do that input cost kind of scenario in a spreadsheet, just because a lot of the times you just got to factor in what does that frame cost. So it's going to be a little bit more finicky. So that's one model, square inch. It works great. It's probably the most popular. Another way to think about it is hourly. So if you're somebody who does more project-based work, so you really are, it's more something where you kind of need to do it based on your time, or you're somebody who you have a pretty good grasp on how long things will take you. So you're like, oh, I know murals take me this long if they're this size, or this size. You can start to think, well, how much do I want to make per hour? And you can work backwards that way. I would say the hourly rate doesn't work great for a ton of artists because they don't have a good grasp on how long their art takes them. And then all of a sudden they're taking commissions, and like 120 by 20 takes them 4 hours. 120 by 20 takes them 8 hours, and they're charging vastly different amounts. And that doesn't make sense. But if you're somebody who's steady, you do certain types of projects where this could work for you, consider working backwards and thinking like, well, what do I want to make per hour, and how am I going to work backwards to get there? And then the last thing, which I actually think you should be kind of using as a factor to both of these, is market comparison. So research comparable artists, look at the market, and make sure you're adjusting to who else is out there, who you think are your peers, or like I said, people that you might want to kind of be one day. You don't want to be too far off because, like I said, it's hard to climb that mountain from the bottom if you're priced really, really low to begin. But I think that market comparison can be really helpful if you're like, okay, I'm doing a show. I think I'm pretty similar to this artist. Let me go to her website. Let me see what she's charging. Okay, it looks like her, she's doing the square inch method and her multiplier appears to be 1.5. Maybe I can like test that out and see if it makes sense with my input costs. Like, it is good to look at other artists in the sense of, oh, we're going to have booths right next to each other. Am I going to be like vastly different if you are truly peers? So that's definitely something to think about. So those are the 3 main methods. The last thing I want to share is commissions. So I really believe commissions kind of have their own math. What I do to keep it simple is whatever I would charge for that piece normally on my website, I just add 10%. I keep it really simple. You could add 15%, maybe you could add a little bit more. The reason I do it that way is because there is a lot of extra headache, time, back and forth with a commission, because you are taking a concept and you are formulating it to fit exactly what is in someone else's mind. And that requires a lot of extra bandwidth, and you should charge a little bit of extra for that. And I also have never had any pushback. I've never had any issues with saying, this is why my commissions cost a little bit more. It's not a vast difference. And so I've never had any issues with it, but I do think that is important. So definitely consider that commissions, you should charge a little more for them, because they are not even a little more, frankly. Usually they're a lot more work, and that's why a lot of artists actually burn out on commissions. So those are all things you can think about, which is hopefully helpful. Lastly, the mindset shift. So pricing is psychology, and you have to convince yourself, and that's what I hope we can do on this call today, that your dream client is going to respect the number you put out there. If they don't, they are not your dream client. They are not your ideal client. And if you listen to the last episode, your ideal client is not just some person who can, some crazy rich person who can afford your work. It's somebody who's dying to have what you do. And I will give the example of, because I'm not really like a handbag person, but that probably would be a good example, but like clothing. I really like well-made, timeless clothes. I also like some crazy stuff, but for this example, I am very willing to save up and spend more on a blouse that I know I will keep for 5 years, even if it's like quote unquote out of the budget and I'm not just like the perfect client who can afford it, than buying 10 of those blouses that I throw away from Amazon. And so I think you need to think about your art that way. Your ideal client, yes, it might be somebody who money is no issue, but it also might be somebody who is willing to pay that premium because they understand it equates value. And in reverse, that same person also expects to pay a certain amount for artwork. And if your artwork is not speaking to that price they expect to pay, they're not going to value your artwork as much. So I'm going to come back to that clothing example. The clothes I buy from Amazon, because yes, I've bought clothes from, Amazon or Target, or, you bought stuff that's more affordable, obviously. I don't take care of to the extent of, that beautiful dress I bought for a wedding. Like, I'm getting that dress dry cleaned. I'm like, it is front and center in my closet, and I just like to look at it versus, the leggings I bought off Amazon, I throw them in the wash and I don't really think about them, and they get a hole in them. I'm like, okay, whatever, we'll just donate them, throw them away. So you don't want people to have that thought around your artwork. You want them to cherish it, look at it every day, admire it, and pricing does have a little bit of a factor in that. I also want to kind of, when thinking about psychology and the mindset shift, I think we equate raising prices with killing demand. In this luxury market, when you raise your prices appropriately and they are where they need to be, it can actually increase demand because of what I just talked about. People see the work as more valuable. So it's important to understand that, you can raise your prices and actually have more success when you do it the right way. I also want to add, you should be raising your prices every year. I recommend kind of doing an audit on your business every 6 months, if not even just like every quarter, just to see what's selling, what's working, what's not. And if things are really flying, you can raise your prices, every 6 months, or maybe even with like a new collection. That's a really good time to raise your prices. Or highly recommend raising your prices every year, especially at the start of a new year. It's so easy to say, and these are my 2026 prices. These are my 2027 commission rates. Like, that's very normal, easy for people to understand. And it's a great way for you to slowly raise your prices in a way that's credible, that makes sense, and people aren't going to freak out about it. Finally, sustainability and like loving what you do and not working yourself to the bone for that, $50 sale beats being overly busy all the time. Like, I have just been in periods of my business where I've been so frantically busy, frankly, because I probably didn't charge enough. And so I have all these like commissions coming in, but I'm so busy, but at the end of the day, I'm not making that much money. And I'm like, what am I doing? That doesn't work. It's not good for your business long term. It's not good for you, your mental health long term. Also, for all the reasons we've talked about before, it's not going to give your brand that longevity that pricing higher probably will. So I just want to say that, pricing is tough, pricing is personal, but hopefully a couple of these little tips that I gave you today will make you evaluate your pricing a little bit closer. I will drop a couple of Substacks that I've written on the subject that kind of break down more specifically pricing, tips on pricing, how to think about this for yourself. But what I would suggest as homework for you guys today is to do an audit of your pricing. Go through your entire website, go through maybe your partners, the galleries you work with, and look at what your pricing is and start to say, okay, what would this be per square inch? Am I even across the board? That's vital. If you're not even across the board, you need to figure out how to get there. Are there things where they're selling so crazy quickly? It's probably an indication I need to raise my prices. Are there places where things are selling really slowly? That might not be an indicator you need to lower them. It might be an indicator you need to either, let's say it's a gallery, like rework that relationship if it's not a good fit, or focus on marketing to the right people who would pay that amount. So I would say your homework today is to audit your pricing, see where you already are, and determine if you need to make a change. If you do, I'd love to set up a one-on-one call with you, or check out those Substacks. They're free. You can read them. You can learn all about my different pricing tips that just kind of expand on what we talked about today. But I hope you found this helpful. I hope you are having a great week, and so excited season 2 is back. If you enjoyed this episode or the past couple of episodes, please make sure to leave a review if you want. It's really quick, but also make sure you subscribe. That's the biggest thing you can do. If you can subscribe, it's free. It makes sure you don't miss an episode. It's not going to really do anything other than just make sure that my episodes pop up in your feed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. And it really makes a huge difference. So it sounds crazy, but it makes a very big difference to me, and it's free and pretty easy for you. It takes about 1 second. So consider subscribing, leave a rating review if you really love it, and I will be back next week. But thank you, and so glad we're back. So have a great week, everybody.